$2 trillion.
12 zeros means Nvidia's market cap is more than the individual GDPs of Russia, Mexico, Australia.
Can you imagine a single company responsible for not building just products, but industries worth of trillions of dollars?
Feels very much like the iPhone moment for the AI industry.
It just took off after ChatGPT.
Facebook, Amazon, Google, and Microsoft, which are developing AI chatbots.
And as the AI explosion continues to reverberate across the tech industry,
of course, that ends up pointing to one company as a clear beneficiary.
From video gaming, VFX, cloud computing, cryptocurrency, artificial intelligence, and now humanoid robots. Nvidia is now the third largest company in the world, behind Microsoft and Apple. But what's even more interesting, unlike their competition, Nvidia competed with over 300 competitors for this spot, while every other company has deeper pockets, better products, larger teams, and in fact, all the companies you see on this list have 100 to 200,000 employees. Some even have a million plus. But Nvidia has just 36,000, and just a single man who's led it since its inception. So where did his origin story begin? In a garage, dorm room, or basement? Well, it started with a war.
In 1973, I think I was 9 years old, my older brother was 10. There was an upheaval. Military was tanks and soldiers were marching down the middle of the street. People were shooting each other, and so my parents felt that it was probably best to send us to the United States to live with our uncle.
And so was decided. Young Jensen would move to US for his further studies. But there was a big problem. The boarding school which Jensen's parents chose was a little off, to say the least.
The entire ground was covered with cigarette butts. It was just cigarettes everywhere. I've never seen that many cigarette butts. I was expecting a roommate about my age. Turns out my roommate was 17 years old, getting ready for bed. I noticed that he had all these fresh wounds, and he had just come from the hospital. He was in a fight. He had 7 stab wounds, and the other kid was killed. And so that was kind of the beginning of my American experience, if you will. And I loved it. I loved every moment of Oneida.
After his parents realized about the school, they soon shifted to the US to support their kids. And Jensen got a job as a waiter at Denny's to make ends meet. It's interesting to think that this would be the same Denny's where Jensen would meet 2 of his co-founders for Nvidia 20 years later. In 1993, Jensen Huang, who is now one of the best operators in the tech industry, gets an offer from one of his old clients. Chris and Curtis proposed Jensen to start a company with a very simple idea: to help people build computer graphics. Now, PCs hadn't become popular yet, and there were few games for PCs, but the problem with most of them was that really had bad graphics. Jensen was from the Pac-Man generation. So the idea of making PC graphics better made perfect sense to him. So they agreed to build a graphics acceleration chip for PCs. But the first few years of Nvidia are no different from the first few years of Jensen's life.
And so I took this idea to Sand Hill Road, and they told me there was no video game market. People don't start companies to play games. And my parents, I remember calling my mom and telling her that I'm going to start this company, and she says, you know, what do you guys do? And I said, we build these things called 3D graphics chips, and people would use them to play games. And then she said, why don't you go get a job?
All the 3 founders were great operators, but none of them had any idea about the business. So
there was nothing to do. Imagine having no emails. No one writes. You have no action items. There's nothing on your calendar. I used to nap at work. I still nap at work.
Now, while Jensen is wrapping his misery with humor, make no mistake that this was a very desperate time for Nvidia. Dell, HP, IBM, no one was ready to buy their product. They said it was too expensive, and they were absolutely right. That is exactly why there were no calls, no emails, no meetings, because no one wanted to build with Nvidia. So being stuck with no buyers, Nvidia decided to self-fund their product. Now Jensen goes to his old boss for investment, who doesn't have that kind of money. But a recommendation from him gave Jensen a meeting with a major investor. But he still has to pitch his idea, and you know how well that's going so far. Despite that, Jensen prepares a plan, goes to the meeting, and needless to say, he messes up big time. Overwhelmed with all the rejections, he struggles to build a convincing case for Nvidia. But all hope is not lost. Jensen was a known expert in the industry who had helped his previous company reach over $100 million valuation with the same investor. Now, based on his track record, Sequoia Capital agreed to give him a $20 million investment for Nvidia, starting with $2 million as seed funding. Okay, so Nvidia has some money, but still no buyers. Even if they ended up building a product, it would be too expensive. Now, the conventional wisdom of business will tell you always listen to your customers. But Jensen was no businessman. He was an engineer.
And so when our customers told us they weren't interested, we built it anyways. We risked our entire company and we built it anyways. And the reason for that is because we believed it. We believed that if we built it, they might not come. But if we don't build it, they can't come.
Now this was absolute madness, and I'll tell you why. Because the product that Nvidia believed in so much was never going to work. NV1 was the first product launch, and as a technology, it was amazing. It was the world's first consumer chip that could simulate 3D models in real time. And not just that, it also had a sound processor and its own software, which allowed professionals to do geometric calculations much faster. It caught so much attention that Sega, the video game industry giant, closed a deal with Nvidia to get their console games to PC. But NV1 didn't sell. It was a commercial disaster because it wasn't fully complete and had issues like crashing, blank screen, and no software. There were almost no games or even applications that were made near its launch, and that only ended up making things much worse. Jensen says the situation was so bad that they couldn't hire even CFOs because they saw the balance sheets and realized the struggle Nvidia was about to face. But by now, Nvidia had caught a lot of attention in the industry, and more than 70 different startups started competing with them. They weren't concerned though. They were busy trying to make the next generation NV2 and a software platform for Sega games that would need Nvidia GPUs to run on. Things seemed to be on course, and then Microsoft just dropped a bomb. You see, the reason Nvidia got an offer from Sega was because their previous game console had similar hardware as the NV1. It was based on very similar principles, which meant migration from console to PC did not require a lot of change in the game software. But Microsoft just launched a new platform for building 3D applications on Windows, and this was incompatible with NV1. So any new software that would come out on Windows would never work on the NV1. Now this wasn't done in competition. Microsoft, even in 1995, was a very large company, and in their process, they just realized that using triangles as a building block of 3D shape would be much more efficient than squares, which Nvidia was using up until now. So NV1 and even NV2, because it also used the same principles, was out of PC graphics. Have you heard of something called the first mover's advantage? Nvidia got the opposite. They were at a first mover's disadvantage. They had no money left, they got kicked out from their market, and now there's a 10 million bankruptcy ahead of them.
You know, as much as you and I might picture trouble, you know, and harassment and racism and all sorts of things, Jensen, I never heard him express it that way. Yeah, he realized later it was a reform school, but what he always talked about was the opportunity to sit on his window ledge and reach out and grab an apple and sit on his window ledge and eating apples. You know, you say, but what did you do? Well, I cleaned floors with toothbrushes and I got beat up a bunch, but you know, I got to eat apples. So it's really kind of interesting, this circumstance that many would have seen as oppressive and demeaning and demoralizing. You know, young Jensen found the good in and found motivation and drive.
Now just take a pause to think. A company that was on the brink of extinction in 1997 is now the third largest company in the world. By now, Nvidia had competed with more than 200 companies and was the only one to survive. So what was Nvidia doing so different that other companies didn't? Now according to Jensen, it was their perspective. And what he did after this crash was nothing short of downright crazy. He calls up Sega and explains how their partnership was never going to work out. And then he proceeds to ask for the full payment even though they didn't deliver the product. Sega pays in full, no one knows why, and that gives them 6 months of headway. Now Jensen proceeds to do a mass layoff, one of the only layoffs in the company's history, leaving only 35 of the best team members with one simple goal: to build the next generation GPU in about 6 months. Only that it was impossible. Even today, every year, you get only one iPhone, and sometimes they don't even change the chip, just a rebranded iPhone. Now, because building a new chip meant designing, manufacturing, testing, and repeating it for at least 2 times, maybe 3, to make sure you've covered all the bugs and issues that can come up during practical use. And each iteration takes at least 6 months. And they did not have that 6 months. So they started hunting for something that could speed up this process. And then they found a company which made computers for simulation. Looking at their technology, Nvidia realized it was similar to what they had, and they could use it to simulate chip design. If this could simulate the chip, they could fix all the bugs in just one single iteration. And that's exactly what they did. The chip designed launched in 6 months was the NV3 or the Riva 128, which gave rise to some of the most popular games in the industry. And after 3 successful iterations, they coined the term GPU for their chips. And they went public in 1999, valued at $600 million. This is what gave Nvidia their unfair advantage. Their resilience gave them a perspective that none of the competition has. They had realized 3D graphics in games uses the same technology as world simulation would need. Look at the water, physics, and everything. So if a company were to solve 3D graphics, they would also need to solve world simulation. By doing that, it would make them one of the most important technology companies in the world. In 2012, a researcher named Alex used Nvidia GPUs to build one of the first successful AI softwares, or more accurately, an artificial neural network. Since then, Nvidia has been at the forefront of every technological breakthrough, including cloud computing, cryptocurrency, and now AI and deep learning. Now today, every modern supercomputer owned by Google, Amazon, Facebook, and a whole lot of research centers are built using Nvidia's GPUs. Yes, we can talk about how many billions of dollars they're getting in revenue and how they call the modern equivalent of selling shovels in a gold rush. But this doesn't explain the full picture. Nvidia's ability to have a perspective and go against all challenges to reach the goal has given them a superpower. The superpower to reach gold rushes even before people find them. And that's how they sell shovels.
If you were magically 30 years old again today, and you were going to Denny's and you're talking about starting a company,
I wouldn't do it. I know. And the reason for that is really quite simple. Building a company and building Nvidia turned out to have been a million times harder than I expected it to be. Any of us expected it to be. And at that time, if we realized the pain and suffering and just how vulnerable you're going to feel and the challenges that you're going to endure, the embarrassment and the shame and, the list of all the things that go wrong, I don't think anybody would start a company. Nobody in their right mind would do it. And I think that that's kind of the superpower of an entrepreneur. They don't know how hard it is. And they only ask themselves, how hard can it be?
As of 23rd March 2024, Nvidia sits at the $2 trillion market cap, helping us build computers for the future.